Hello there, I'm Bruce Martin,
And I'm Marie Griffith.
and we are here to talk about why I left Giant Church Incorporated. This is
Mhm.
episode 2, Marie.
Yes.
Excited to be here.
I'm
We're not following the blog series, perfectly,
Yeah.
but I loved the title of her second post. It was
Mhm.
called "Let's Make a Deal at Giant Church Incorporated," and
Mhm.
I couldn't help but thinking of the Price is Right and Let's Make a Deal and all those game
Yeah.
shows where you had to trade something so that you could get something, and it was this. You had often had a series of choices. So we're going to unpack a little bit of that today. I wanted to come back to something that's really important for Marie to share again, back on the why we're even doing this, because some people could see this blog series or this podcast as, hey, we're just being critical of the church.
Yeah.
So Marie, talk again about your why when you wrote the blog series and why we're doing what we're doing now.
Because thousands of people are influenced by Giant Church Incorporated because thousands of people go to Giant Church Incorporated. I had somebody message me last week and ask if a particular church was the one that I was talking about, but this is why I call it Giant Church Incorporated.
Instead of calling out one specific
Yeah,
church.
it's not one specific church. This is happening all over the place. So I want to be clear about that. But the reason why I'm doing it is because of that. Because if Giant Church Incorporated is not telling the truth about who God is, if they're not telling the truth about Jesus and the gospel, well then
You have
there's
thousands
so
of
many
people,
of us
right.
walking around living from lies instead of the truth. So
Right.
that's why.
And living sometimes from very broken places that
Yes.
they're not even totally aware of. Again, we
Yes.
talked a little bit last
Mhm.
time about red flags and how we can sometimes ignore those red flags, and we talked about not doing that. The other thing that I wanted to come back again and say, when we talk about Giant Church Incorporated, we're not talking about all mega churches,
No.
because Giant Church Incorporated can be a church of, I've seen this before. There was a church of 25 people that was led by a
Yes.
highly authoritarian male pastor who wielded so much power over the people in that congregation. And this was a Christian church,
Yes.
that he even got one of my extended family members to sign over all of his property to this person when he died, so that when this family member passed on, the house was given to the pastor, and the pastor proceeded to move the other family member out of the house at that point.
Yeah.
So Giant Church Incorporated is not just about mega churches. It's about this authoritarian, spiritually abusive environment that people find themselves in, and sometimes don't know,
Yes.
how did we get here? And so one of the things that I promised in our last episode that I wanted to talk about was this thing of collective narcissism.
Mhm.
Most of you are familiar with narcissism, individual narcissism. So I'm sort of I'm a case study on that, because I always tell people I'm a recovering narcissist, and so I can help you understand. A narcissist is very much about themselves. It's very easy for them to become self-absorbed. They really see all of the world out there in relation to them, and they expect everyone out there in the world to see their life in relation to them. It's very hard for them to look outside of themselves. And so I remember in my first few years as a pastor, this is back in the Rocket City days, we had 3 pastors that were leading, and I was serving as the lead pastor in that time. And we had gone away for a retreat, a leadership retreat, and we were going to, some spiritual disciplines and prayer time. And one of our pastors said, I want to do a discipline tonight, a little exercise tonight called Fatal Flaws. And they set it up this way. We want you to share what you think your fatal flaw is, and then the other 2 of us will speak into your life, and we'll say, here's what we're saying. The reason was we wanted to be accountable to each other. So it was a great thing. And I remember being, I was actually thinking more about what I was going to tell these other 2 guys that I saw in their life that was a real problem. Again, the recovering narcissist. So we went through that process, and when it got to me, I shared with them, hey, here's what I think my fatal flaw is, and I'm going to need to be careful about this. And both of them said, yep, we can see that, and we're going to hold you accountable on that, but we don't think that's your fatal flaw. And I was like, well, what do you think it is? And they said, pride. And I was thinking, how can that be? I'm the most humble person that I know. And here's the thing. I say that jokingly, but here's the thing. The last person often to know that they're a narcissist is the narcissist.
Right.
Other people can see it. Other people are like, hey, that guy's all about himself. The same thing happens with collective narcissism. When you're in a community where there's collective narcissism, often you don't know it because everyone around you is drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, it's the culture.
And so I wanted you to talk about even why you stayed, so how that collective narcissism caused you to even stay as long as you did.
Well, part of the deal you're making with Giant Church Incorporated, you're basically saying, I will be loyal to you, Giant Church Incorporated, and to your core values, and do as you say.
I'm going to give, I'm going to serve, I'm going to attend.
Yes.
I'm going to go to classes.
And so in return for that, I get to feel part of this big special thing that's happening. This, you just feel good about it, and it feels powerful too. I mean, you know, that's a part of the reason too that I call it Giant Church Inc. It's power. They're about power.
And here's the other thing that I've seen:
Yes.
if you'll toe the line, and if you'll do all the things that Giant Church expects from you, and you'll do it with complete loyalty and not any what they would call gossip, you know, not asking any questions. Not only do you feel good, but you'll actually get recognized.
Oh yeah.
And you'll be affirmed. And a lot of times this happens publicly. I know of a church that actually had an awards night. I mean, literally an awards night where everyone's dressed up in gowns and the black ties, and they were awarding certain people that were a part of Giant Church Incorporated for their loyalty and their faithfulness, and they would actually give them a little trophy they could put on their shelf like a Grammy. And so what happens is there's all these feel-good things that are going on, and you're like, wow, I like this.
Yeah, I'm doing good things.
And that's another thing we need to talk about.
Yeah.
Because when you told me, when you first started writing this blog series, one of your greatest concerns is that people would think you're just criticizing the church.
Yeah.
Because why?
Oh, because part of the unspoken promise you make at Giant Church Incorporated and that they teach is loyalty without question, and part of that is no gossip, no questioning, no even healthy necessary criticism is viewed as gossip.
Right.
And it's not just viewed as gossip against Giant Church Incorporated. They wrap that up and say it's against God.
Now, by the way, that's called spiritual abuse. When we say, if you ask any questions, you're going against God, that's part of spiritual abuse.
Yes.
We're attaching God. It's almost like God's going to get you, or God's going to be angry with you, or at the very least, God's going to be disappointed with you. So you just need to keep towing the line here.
So, you know, some people have asked me, in 2014 was when I quit. I was no longer on staff at a particular church that I was part of. But it was 3 years later that we left.
That you left.
I did not talk about what was going on, even though I saw clearly in 2014. But again, I stuffed, I pressed it down because you just don't want to believe this. Plus, you've got the whole collective narcissism going on.
All the good things we're doing.
All good things we're doing, and I'm part of this good thing. So how bad can it be? Well, it kept getting worse. But I did not talk about it with my husband, even when he would bring it up.
Yeah.
And he would get so frustrated. But I would say, but we're not supposed to talk. I mean, even with my husband, I felt like I was being disloyal to Giant Church Incorporated.
And underneath that, really, what was going on? What were you feeling?
Fear.
It's fear.
Fear.
It's one of the weakest emotions you can feel. And this is another way that it can help you identify if you're in a spiritually abusive situation. If you have a sense of, all right, you might be being recognized and you might love the power that you have, and it's like, wow, we're doing all these great things, but you also have this underlying sense of fear. I can't say the wrong thing. I can't do the wrong thing. I don't want to make the wrong people upset with me.
Right. And part of that fear comes from, you've seen how the other people that have criticized or questioned or left, you've seen how they've been vilified.
Right. So it's if you're towing the line and if you're doing everything, if you've made the deal with Giant Church and you're helping them build power and their network and the money's flowing and all, and the attendance is growing and all of that, then you're going to be recognized and you're going to be appreciated and you might even get public recognition. But if you start asking questions or you start talking about things, you're going to be ostracized, you're going to be shunned, you're going to be told in no uncertain terms to be quiet, or you're dishonoring God by gossip. That's scary.
When my husband and I were in the process of leaving, and we would meet some of our friends, very faithful Christ followers from other churches, we would meet them at restaurants to discuss different things we were experiencing, because we still wanted someone from the outside to tell us, is this right? I mean, we were so confused and wondering still, are we seeing things correctly? I would be scared that people from Giant Church Incorporated would overhear us if we were in a restaurant. So I was always looking around to see. But part of that is because I knew the consequences. I had seen people very close to the staff and leadership be treated terribly because they spoke out or left or even asked a question or tried to hold someone accountable.
Yeah.
I saw it happen and I was scared.
And so there's another word for that, and it's called bullying in our culture. In other words, when there is it may not be verbalized, but when there's an unspoken understanding, if you don't act the right way, there's going to be negative consequences. And this is what it's going to look like. So when a person feels fear or intimidation, again, those are red flags that you do not need to ignore. Those are things you need to go, hey, what's going on here? What do I feel afraid about talking about this? And I really need to apologize to you, because I remember that season when you were a part of Giant Church Incorporated, and frankly, I wasn't asking a lot of questions, and here's why. Again, with collective narcissism, the people that are a part of the collective often don't know that they're a part of a collectively narcissistic thing, but people on the outside can often see it. In other words, people from the outside sometimes are going, gosh, that looks like a cult to me.
People on the inside cannot see this, not even at churches, but corporations.
Yes.
This happens. The inside of the place cannot see.
Right.
I mean, that's the blind spots
right.
that you just can't see that, we're part of this narcissistic system.
So part of the reason I didn't ask certain questions is because this is where I was wrong, is, I'm like, well, Marie's a mature believer. She loves the Lord. So, if she's seeing things that are significantly wrong, she's going to do something different. Here's where this was sort of the game changer for me, and where I realized our discussion started changing a little bit. You were, for a period of time, 9 months, on staff at Giant Church Incorporated. Talk about that season, because that's when I realized, oh my goodness, this may be a problem.
Yeah. Well, I was so excited to finally be on staff, because
to be invited on staff.
To be invited on staff, because really they create an environment where that is the dream. To be on staff at Giant Church Incorporated is just like, oh my God, you get to serve God, you get to be part of this huge thing, and that's the pinnacle of your spiritual journey.
Yep.
And so I was invited on staff, and with the understanding, I thought, to fix some things that were going on in the financial office. So time went on, and I could see, I was asking questions, trying to make some changes, but I kept being blocked from making those changes. My questions weren't really being answered. I kept asking them, but they started saying things like, well, Marie, you're such a rule follower. You're so rigid. So the one thing they liked about me, because I'm a very loyal person and dependable, but with that, yes, I tend to be a rule follower. And so in that instance, though, they almost shamed me for that.
Yeah.
And called me rigid, and why can't I just go with the flow?
Which would make you not want to ask more questions, because you're like, well, gosh, maybe I am too much, maybe I am too rigid.
Yeah, and so 9 months after I had been invited on staff, I stopped asking questions and I resigned.
So she stopped making that part of the deal.
I did. I stopped making that part of the deal.
But this is what's it. But
there was a line still.
There was still a line.
That I was not going to
But
cross.
you stayed at the church.
I still stayed at the church. And we talked about that last week, because I said this was the first time my family and I had been part of something together. My husband had not attended church regularly before. We were all in, small groups, going to the church, worshiping together, serving,
and good things were taking place.
Good things were happening, and I was going through that whole like, God, can this be? It was just this tension. I was always dealing with the tension.
So, and that's what I want to talk about, because I even expressed and you said some of you might have felt the tension when I talked about a church that would give someone awards, plaques, or little trophies for loyalty and faithfulness and stuff like that. There is a place in the community of Christ to recognize people that have served. I was just thinking I just came to my mind, but that in the final chapter of the book of Romans, if I remember correctly, Paul goes down a list of people. And he says, I'm so grateful for them, and I'm thankful for them, and I'm thankful for their service. So there's a place for that. So here's the tension that I'm dealing with, even as we're doing this Why I Left Giant Church Incorporated podcast. Jesus said in one place, he said, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. But there's another place where Jesus said, don't do your acts of righteousness to be seen by men. Otherwise, that's all the reward that you're getting out of the game. And it made me think about the tension that I have felt even as a pastor. I wanted our church, the church that I was leading, I wanted us to be about good things that glorified God. But there was this tension and there was this reality. And here's just what I believe. I don't think it's possible for any human being to do anything with completely pure motives. I mean, it's just this, it's part of living in the flesh and seeking to walk in the Spirit. But I can remember a time where that collective narcissism really got to me as a pastor, and I didn't realize what a problem it was at the time. It was only later that I realized that was a real problem. There was a time in the last church that I led that we were helping a lady that was under-resourced. She was a single mom, and she lived in a very distressed part of our community, and she didn't have a car. And so some folks in our congregation had gotten together, and we had found a car for her, and we were going to give her this car. She had no idea this was happening. We were going to give her this car on a Sunday morning, and I was excited about it because I was like, this is, the kind of church that I want to be a part of, a church that cares about people that are marginalized, that cares about the least of these. And that's good. But there was also this dark side. I wanted the people in our congregation to be proud of our congregation, and I wanted other churches in the city at some level to know, hey, Bruce sure is doing a good thing over there with that church that he's leading. And I can remember the time that when we were giving this card to this lady, someone was filming it. And I don't think it was live or anything, but now when I look back at that, I'm like, was that glorifying or was that horrifying? And here's why. If we're filming something so that we can put it out there on social media, see what good things that we're doing, I realized in that moment for this person that was receiving this vehicle, we had actually diminished her dignity. Exploited her. At that point, all she can do is go, thanks. And she was genuinely appreciative. But I realized the way that we went about that, and it's hard to do this corporately, it's hard to do this collectively, but Jesus said, when you're doing your giving, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. For me, sometimes individually, that's easier to do, to give or to help someone and not make a big deal of it. But because of collective narcissism, and we want to be proud of our church, and there's a temptation to go, doo-doo-doo, as Jesus said, announcing it with trumpets when you help the poor. And I'm telling on myself here. I realized that was part of the tension that I was dealing with. So I'm still in the process of living out both of those commands of Christ. Let your light so shine that people will see your good work and glorify your Father in heaven. And ultimately, and then don't do your acts of righteousness to be seen by men.
Yes.
For me, ultimately, it comes down to a heart issue.
It does. And what I want people to see is really what Giant Church Incorporated does is it makes it easier for us to announce our good deeds.
Yes.
It makes us want to.
Well, and with social media and everything, there's actually, think about it, you're looking for reactions. You want people to like it or love it, or I don't know what all the new reactions are going to be.
What I need, what I desire that our pastors and our leaders do, and I hope that I'm doing, is pointing me always to Jesus.
Yeah.
And you know, Jesus has a totally different way than where we're doing this, people.
Yeah.
He does. He does not grasp for power.
No.
He does not strive for more.
He was not looking for greater attendance. You know,
No.
at one of his biggest sermons, I mean, so thousands of people, he's fed 5,000 people. Now they're following him everywhere. I mean, this is literally a moving congregation of 5,000 plus people. And so Jesus, because Jesus in so many ways, he did things that were just antithetical to power. You know, he did this really profound teaching about, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood,
Yeah.
you have no part with me. And guess what? 4,988 people left. And he's just got the 12, you know, and he says to them, are you going to leave me too? And Peter, I think Peter probably wanted to take him aside and go, hey, Jesus, that whole cannibalistic sounding thing, that I don't even get that. But Peter said, we believe that you have the words of truth. And then Jesus went on to explain, hey, I'm talking about a spiritual reality or a spiritual truth right here. And that's something that sometimes is hard to help people understand. At Giant Church Incorporated, there's a temptation, and I'm gonna talk about my own issue there. There's a temptation for us to paint a picture of, hey, if you join this church, if you become a part of this congregation, your life's going to be so much better. And that's true as long as you're not defining that better by you're not going to have to carry a cross, and you're not going to suffer, and you're not going to be persecuted. And those are the things sometimes we're not talking about in Christian circles, or that we're not talking about as a community of believers. Jesus said at different times, people are going to hate you. And that's typically not the kind of thing that you're going to hear at Giant Church Incorporated, because there is that collective narcissism. We're doing all of these good things, so everybody do your part.
And put on the happy face.
And put on the happy face, and don't ask
always.
questions, and then we'll be able to keep this thing rolling.
Right. And I wanted to contrast what we were talking about, loyalty, which is more like, you think of, this is how I think of it, it's sort of like the feudal system. You know, there's like
talk about that.
It's like a overlording. Loyalty is more of a like, oh, you're my king, right or wrong kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Bible really never talks about loyalty, but it talks about faithfulness.
Yes.
Which is a completely different thing.
Yeah.
You know, faithfulness is for the other's good. Faithfulness, to Jesus.
Yep.
And then it's just totally different. So what Paul was doing at the end of Romans, what you said, when he was grateful for, he's grateful for their faithfulness to Jesus.
Yes.
Not for serving 20 hours last month in the kids department.
Right.
He's, you know what, he's so appreciative for their faithfulness.
So if I'm encapsulating this idea of collective narcissism, in one sense, individual narcissism says, look at me. Collective narcissism says, look at us. But I think a healthy non-narcissism in our lives and in the church should be, look at Jesus.
Oh,
I mean, ultimately, and again,
look
please,
at
I'm not
Jesus.
trying to sound hyper spiritual, but
No,
ultimately,
we're on the journey.
but ultimately, we need to be pointing people to Christ. When I looked at, in the last church that I led, I stopped looking at the metrics that a lot of churches look at, you know, about budgets and buildings and bodies and all of that attendance. You know, I just told people, don't even take attendance. Don't even, you know, now sometimes it would be so small you couldn't help but take attendance because you can just sort of do a mental count in your head. But I tried to get away from all of those metrics, and I tried to only live by one metric. And I would talk to our elder team about this one metric. Are we making disciples who are living in obedience to the commands of Christ? Because that's a hard issue. And over and over again, I could look at people in that church, and I could look at families, and I could look at individuals, and I could say, that person is walking with Jesus. That person is living in obedience. That person is living out this stuff that Jesus said to do. So in that, it didn't matter what the budget said. It didn't matter what the numbers were. We were following, as best I understood, the command of Christ to make disciples who literally obey everything that I've commanded. You know, you talked about one reason that it took so long to leave was fear, and the fear that you felt. I thought in your blog post you quoted Christy Thomas, and by the way, all of these resources are available in her blog post. I'll tell you how to get to that in just a minute. But I think sometimes we don't leave because we're so tired. This is what Christy Thomas said. She said, once we have spent time in a particular belief system, especially in a church, quote unquote, church environment that demands massive contributions, unquestioned loyalty, absorbs all spare time, and which forms the entire social network for people, most people don't have enough mental energy to figure out that something is terribly wrong.
Yeah.
And I thought, holy cow, did you experience some of that?
Oh, exhausted. Yes.
You're just going 90-0.
Yeah.
So,
And I thought, this is the way I'm supposed to feel. This is
I should feel tired
this.
all the
If
time.
I'm not tired, I'm not being poured out.
And it reminds me of the words that Jesus gave to the religious leaders in his time. He said, you tie heavy burdens on people, and you won't lift even your pinky finger to help them. And then he called to the masses and he said, come to me, you that are weary, and you're heavy burdened, and I will give you rest for your souls. The way of Christ is different than the way of Giant Church Incorporated. It's a place where we serve from joy. When we give, it's not announcing it with trumpets. It really is, gosh, look at Jesus.
Yeah. And think about the difference between even loyalty and faithfulness.
Yeah.
I want to be faithful
Yes.
to Jesus Christ. And I want, wherever I go to church or whoever's leading me or teaching me, I want to be pointed to Jesus at all times. Don't point to me making my life great. I already have that instinct.
Yeah.
I need to be pointed to Jesus constantly.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
To point people away from Giant Church Incorporated and back to Jesus. That's really the point.
Yeah. And so I was trying to think in my own heart, there's always this tension that's going on. I only truly want to be loyal to Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately. So I might be faithful in a lot of ways, whether that's writing or blogging or speaking or other things, but ultimately I only want to be loyal to Jesus, never an institution. I've said for years, I don't think Jesus died on the cross for an institution or an organization. He died for people. He died for a world of people. And so I want to be doing everything I can with my life and whatever time he gives me to point people to Jesus. One of the things that we wanted to point out to our viewers and our listeners, because we recognize, even after the first video that we did, this, even though sometimes Marie and I are a little lighthearted about it, we recognize that for some of you, this is triggering some emotions that are difficult,
They're painful.
that are painful, and we don't want to in any way, shape, or form minimize that pain. And I would just tell you, if you're finding that even as you're going through this series with us, that some of those emotional triggers are taking place and that pain is coming, I would encourage you, talk to a good counselor, a Christian counselor, someone that you can trust, because ultimately, if we're caught up in a collective narcissism situation, we need an objective third party outside. So I'm not talking about going to the pastor of that church for your counseling.
No.
You need an objective third party outside of that corporation, outside of that entity, that can give you input into what you're experiencing. And they can look you in the eye and say, you understand that's manipulation. You understand that's bullying. You understand that's deflection. Because you may not see that on your own, but you know that you're feeling these emotions, you're having these triggers. So if you want to know more about counseling, you can find out more about that at investorlife.org, which is an organization that I'm a part of.
And I've been going to counseling, and it's been a tremendous help. And she's outside, not connected at all to Giant Church Incorporated. So that's what I want to encourage you to. Also, don't ask someone within Giant Church Incorporated, because I'm telling you, Giant
It's
Church
not gonna be
Incorporated
objective.
has a network of all kinds of people: bankers, lenders, realtors, counselors, doctors,
politicians.
So get someone completely outside.
Yes.
You might have to go out.
You might have to go to a
outside
different
your
city.
So I just want to encourage you to do that. It has to be somebody that's completely objective.
So 2 things as we finish. I want to give you a couple of resources. One is I want to encourage you to subscribe to Marie's blog. She's continuing this blog series. So it's at livelikeitmatters.net, livelikeitmatters.net. And if you'll subscribe to that blog, you'll get automatic updates to the things that she continues to put out about why I left Giant Church Incorporated. And she also has, it might have been in that 10th or 11th blog post, but a whole list of resources.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I also wanted you to share another resource that
Yeah.
you brought, that book.
So I talked about this and on the blog. I was on this launch
get it up
team
there where
for
you can
this
see
book.
it.
It's called When Narcissism Comes to Church, Healing Your Community from Emotional and Spiritual Abuse. Chuck DeGroat is a counselor, but also a professor at, I believe, Fuller University.
Okay.
Very good book. And he's actually been part of a counseling team that screens pastors of a church planting organization. And so this is what caused him to write the book. He kept seeing this problem.
Yeah.
That a lot of church planting associations want a narcissistic pastor.
Yeah.
That they don't say they want that, but they end up showing up with those on the spectrum.
Here's the thing. I was the prototypical pastor that you're looking for church plants, because I was, charismatic and winsome, and people liked me, and a good communicator, and all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure how great a communicator Peter was. I mean, he was a fisherman and all of that. But I will also say this about this book. You need to read this if you're wondering, hey, am I in a spiritually abusive environment? Is my church possibly a giant church incorporated? But I will also tell you this. Don't tell the folks in your church that you're reading this, because that's not it's something that they wouldn't respond well to. I will say this. If someone tells you you shouldn't read that book, then you definitely need to read that